Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Eugene Grigo, Chief Content Officer for FTF. And this is another edition of FTF News Live. It's a new a new service from FTS and FTF News, where we speak to movers and shakers in the securities industry. Today, we're speaking with Ken Benson Jr., the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Securities Industry and Financial Markets Association, also known as SIFMA. Ken and his colleagues at SIFMA have been focused on key aspects of the big data trade surveillance project known as the Consolidated Audit Trail, also known as CAT. The Securities and Exchange Commission and the regulator FINRA have been driving this effort for many years. Recently, Ken has been asking the SEC to rethink its customer data collection process, and on another front, the SEC's data breach liability policies related to the CAT regulatory reporting effort. So hello, Ken. And then before we get into the details, could you please tell me a little bit about what you think of the Consolidated Audit Trail?
Sure. Thank you. First of all, Eugene, thank you for having me, and for FTF for having me and being able to speak on behalf of SIFMA and our members today. So, the Consolidated Audit Trail has been 10 years in the making, and it's an enormous undertaking involving, the 24 SROs, including FINRA and the various exchanges. It will end up being the largest database possibly ever created in the world. It's a much more robust database in terms of housing all equities and options transactions, far more robust than OATS, and will ultimately, replace OATS. OATS will go away, which is a good thing because we don't want to have that redundancy out there. And it's something that the industry has been supportive of. And I would note, actually, the industry, and we'll probably get into this more, is, this was a creation of the Securities and Exchange Commission, charging the SROs under the Reg NMS to implement. And the industry really only has responsibility here and obligation here, but not really much authority. So our members have spent tremendous amount of dollars and person hours standing it up. The first two main databases have been stood up. They were stood up last year in the midst of a pandemic. But there's more work to be done, and there are issues that we have been concerned about all along, particularly as it relates to customer information, whether it's PII, proprietary information, and then there are issues around liability, access to data. So a whole host of issues, notwithstanding what's already been implemented and is operating today. There's still a lot of issues that need to be resolved.
Mm-hmm. And then if you could go into a little bit of the detail about why SIFMA is challenging the SEC's data breach liability limits for self-regulated organizations.
So on liability, and this is an issue that we've been involved in for quite some time. When the transaction database was first being stood up, and firms had to, broker-dealers had to sign reporting agreements with the Consolidated Audit Trail, which is effectively an entity of the 24 SROs. Included in that agreement was a limitation of liability for any breach or misuse of data. And that was something that our members found unfair and unpalatable. And we actually litigated over it last year, and in a settlement, the SROs agreed to withdraw that limitation. But the SROs came back in mid-December with a proposed amendment that would reinstate that limitation of liability, effectively a limitation of $500 per incident per reporting firm. And again, the same issues apply. Our members are required effectively by law, in this case by regulation and under Reg NMS, to report transaction data and then ultimately customer data when that database is to be stood up in next year. And yet we have absolutely no control over the protection of that data. So here we are reporting our clients' data into a massive database or two massive databases, largest in the world, over which we have absolutely no control. And yet we would have potential liability, if not reputational liabilities, but certainly potential monetary liability to our clients whose data it is. And the idea that somehow then all the liability is thrust upon us when we have no control over the protection of that data, we just think is completely wrong. So we're pushing back forcefully with the Commission that this makes no sense. There should be no limitation of liability whatsoever. The SROs, the SROs hold the data. Therefore, the burden is on them to protect the data and to hold the liability associated with it.
And what do you see as the problems with the SEC's argument that the proposed limits for CAT data breaches are in line with prior liability limits that they've?
Well, so to be fair, to be fair to the SEC, that's not their argument. That's the argument of the SROs who filed the plan amendment. Our response to that would be the world has changed dramatically with respect to issues around cyber breaches, cyber resiliency, the threat, whether it's threat from nation states, bad actors, or the like. And you don't have to go very far to find it when you look at SolarWinds, the recent SolarWinds hack, which hacked several, to our knowledge, several federal government agencies, let alone private sector participants. We don't know whether any of the SROs were hacked or not, by the way. And so the idea of some sort of limitation of liability is outdated in the current cyber risk environment. And in addition, I mean, one of the arguments that has been made as well, this limitation was applicable when OATS was stood up, but OATS was stood up in the mid 1990s. The world is a far different place today in so many ways, but certainly as it relates to cyber than it was in the mid 1990s. So our view is that this is unconscionable that you would and illogical that you would put this type of limitation. And again, I go back to our members have all the obligations and none of the authority in the CAT, and our members are complying with the CAT. Our members, we support the underlying approach of it. We're doing what we're supposed to do here, but we have no control. We had no control in setting up the CAT, the design of the CAT. We could give our views, but they're only our views. We have no control or real knowledge over how the data is protected. We have no responsibility in how the data is protected. And therefore, we should have no liability once the data is out of our control and in control of the CAT.
So why was it important for SIFMA to ask the SEC to temporarily halt the technical specification process for the customer and account information system known as CAIS of the CAT effort?
So our members felt that just sort of a culmination of events, which has gotten almost, kind of added on exponentially as we've gone on, whether it's the development of the customer account information system, the case, as you pointed out, which will be the basis of the customer database that'll be established and supposed to be set up in July of 2022, whether it's the continuing concerns around the proposed PII, personal identifying information with respect to customers, including retail clients, every retail brokerage client in America that's assumed to be in the case, as well as other specifications that the SROs have proposed with respect to PII in the case that really were never considered, and in many cases data that broker-dealers don't even have, combined with the SROs continuing to push back and try and push liability onto the firms which have no authority or control, as we just discussed, in addition to the SRO's continued objection to the SEC's proposed mitigating amendments in their data security proposal, much of which SIFMA and our members support, to mitigate the risks, still have the PII risk, but mitigating other risk in terms of who can download, pushing, not allowing bulk download of all the data by any SRO outside of the CAT system, which we think would exponentially increase the risk by allowing thousands of employees across 24 different SROs to be able to download data that's not data from their particular SRO, but from other SROs. All of this coming together led us to believe, particularly with the case, the deadline for comments on the case being the end of January, that we really, and then might add, perhaps penultimate, the shocking revelations around SolarWinds and who was hacked in SolarWinds led our members to believe that the SEC's got to stop and take a look at what they're doing in the customer database. We have stood up collectively the transaction database, and that's been a Herculean effort, and that is up and running. But we have time now, and knowing what we know now, particularly in light of SolarWinds, to step back and think, do we really want the SEC to use a third party, which is CAT, which is operated by 24 separate entities, so everybody's in charge and nobody's in charge, to take in all sorts of retail customer PII and put it in a singular database that will certainly be a risky and a target-rich environment for bad actors who have already shown a willingness and propensity to hack government entities. And here, you're really almost outsourcing it. That, to us, it just doesn't make a lot of sense in the current environment. We have plenty of time to step back and look. We at SIFMA have offered alternative solutions, which we believe would still give the SEC what it wants in being able to both have the transaction database, which exists today, and have access to be able to match that on an as-needed basis in terms of looking at individuals related to that transaction database, but without creating this massive risky database out there that inevitably is going to get hacked. So we just thought all those things coming together, we just need to sort of say, stop, SEC, step back, take a look at this. You know more today. Again, SolarWinds wasn't around 10 years ago. Again, the cyber risk threat has grown exponentially over the last 10 years. And they've got plenty of time to go back and take a look at it. So we thought it was the right time, with all those things coming together, just to say, let's just stop and take another hard look at that.
You mentioned some of the top line changes you'd like the SEC to make to the customer and account information system. Are there any other changes that you would like that SIFMA would like to see?
Well, I mean, we would prefer, most important, that you don't create a customer database that takes in PII data. We would prefer more of a request and response approach, similar to what you have today under Blue Sheets. But let's look and see. And we discussed over the last couple of years with the SEC ways that you might expedite the Blue Sheet process. Again, to give, if there's an investigation, if there's an enforcement activity, whatever it may be, to give the SEC more speed than they may have under the current Blue Sheets regime. Maybe that's not the best response. Maybe there's another way to do it. But we think there's got to be a better way than just having a massive database containing PII of every retail client in America, when we know what the cyber risk factors are, and we have time. Again, we've gotten the big part of CAT, and I say we, obviously the SROs, the SEC, the industry has to report, have gotten that up and running. That exists today, and it's working. And actually, I think as reported to me, the level of errors, which was expected in the initial stand-up of the transaction database, are far lower than anybody thought they would be. So that's really actually working pretty well. FINRA's moving forward to get rid of the OATs. We have time to figure out the customer database and not go so fast that everyone's sorry 2 years from now when there's been a massive breach. Clients are upset with their broker. 24 SROs are pointing fingers at each other, and the government's sitting there saying, "Okay, well," and Congress is saying to the SEC, "How could this happen? Let's get in front of it instead of being behind it."
And we don't know the full extent of the SolarWinds scandal, right? We're still finding out more.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And again, we're not trying to point our finger at the government on the SolarWinds, other than to say it just underscores look, we spend a tremendous amount of time with our regulators and government partners on cyber resiliency and cyber defense, cyber training, regular tabletop exercises, industry exercises, joint exercises with whether it's Treasury, regulators, Homeland Security. So we're all in the same place here, but we know the risk is growing exponentially, and we should be looking at ways to address that rather than create more targets.
And speaking of that, have you heard back from the regulators on this issue? I know that there's a process for the response, but for the request for the halt of case, have you heard back from anyone at the SEC or FINRA?
So we're in regular conversations with the SEC on CAT as it is, again, because we're still in the implementation process, and I'm confident we'll have discussions. Other than the only new news here was us saying, you know what, we just need to have a pause and a stop. And look, we're going to have a new commission too, right? We're going to have a new chair coming in. The new chair will want to set his agenda, presumably, and take a look at what's happened over the last couple of years as he does set his agenda. To be fair, I should say, Acting Chair Lee has been very engaged on this and so many other issues as well. So we're in regular conversations with them as it relates to CAT. They're well aware of our views on this. I think we're just trying to push it up the agenda right now.
And with so many issues that yet to be resolved, what would be your advice for securities firms as they prepare to come up to speed with CAT reporting and other related issues? What should they do in the meantime?
So that's a good question. So we have done we have a playbook that we put together on CAT implementation, CAT reporting that's on our website. We have done multiple webinars. We have a webinar coming up this week on CAT implementation, and this is something that
I think it's tomorrow, right?
I believe it is tomorrow, and you can go to our website, sifma.org, and find all of that. And besides looking at the big policy issues with respect to CAT, there's a lot of day-to-day blocking and tackling we do on the implementation. So again, if you look at sifma.org, all of that information is on our website.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time, for taking the time to help us sort out a really complicated issue. So,
Right.
And thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you. And there will be more FTF News live events. But thanks again, Ken. Thank you very much.